Miriam Haley was one of the two main accusers in the 2020 trial of Harvey Weinstein, in which he was found guilty of criminal sex act in the first degree and third degree rape, and sentenced to 23 years in prison. Miriam worked as a production assistant for the Weinstein Company in the early 2000s, during which time she was assaulted by Weinstein. As one of the only victims to have a case make it to trial, Miriam has played a crucial role in the Me Too movement. Miriam, thank you so much for joining us here today. It is an absolute pleasure to host you. I wanted to start off right at the beginning. And the story of the trial against Harvey Weinstein, which took place this year, begins in October 2017, when you spoke out kind of 11 years after your assault. I wanted to start off by talking about these 11 years and the way in which the 2006 incident affected your life and what it was like keeping it to yourself for all this time.
Well, those 11 years, really, I was kind of just suppressing it. What happened was, after the actual incident, when I felt as though I didn't really have a kind of an, I didn't feel that I could comfortably and safely come forward about Harvey Weinstein at the time. Which I feel like, for example, Amber Gutierrez coming out in 2015, that was a very, very good example of why that was scary at the time. And so I kind of just carried on almost as if it didn't happen. I suppressed it, I put it aside, and I continued to kind of almost have, try to have a professional relation to Harvey Weinstein, and just almost ignored what happened because I felt kind of trapped in not being able to talk about it. And so the 11 years, I think, I feel that it obviously affected me on some very deep levels in terms of my probably confidence and just comfort in general in that industry. And I ended up completely moving away from the film and production industry after, sort of a year or a couple of years. And I'm sure that Harvey Weinstein had a lot to do with that and my level of confidence.
So after this long decade, why is it that you chose to come forward with your experience, and how is it that you went about doing this?
When the story first broke and I heard about it and I started to read about it in the news, my initial reaction was actually, I had no interest in getting involved whatsoever. I was carrying on with my life. I had totally put it aside. It was a long time ago, and I suppressed it quite successfully, although I feel that it was always kind of hanging at the back of my mind and awareness. But nevertheless, I didn't feel I wanted to be a part of it. I was, however, extremely amazed at the similarities in the stories. I mean, it was incredible to realize that he was doing this to so many people, and that the stories were so similar to mine. And just his pattern of behavior was so incredibly clear, and that was amazing, considering I had thought that I was pretty much alone in it, more or less. And so I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to kind of get involved, but a few people that I knew what had happened, and other people that I knew just knew that I sort of knew him. And so people would start asking me like, hey, what do you think about this Harvey Weinstein thing? And are you going to say something? And so forth. And it just started to kind of, that seed was planted and all these things started to resurface. And so I still had my concerns about having worked on Project Runway, kind of on a tourist visa at the time, even though it wasn't really a proper official job, but more experiential. But still, it was still a concern to me in terms of immigration. I didn't want to have anyone ask me too many questions about that. And so I spoke to a few friends, and they said, why don't you consult with a lawyer? And so that's what I did. I reached out to Gloria Allred, who I had seen in the news was already involved. She was an American lawyer, which obviously I was in Britain at the time, and there was very little point in going to a British lawyer, and I didn't know any American lawyers. So I just thought, okay, I might as well just reach out to her, and that's what I did. And again, I kind of just offered my anonymous support and said that I was kind of anonymously give a statement to support any case against him, just to confirm that, yes, he is a rapist. He did this to me too. But I think after some conversations, both with Gloria, but with other people as well, with my friends, etc., I think that I decided in the end that coming out publicly was going to have more of an impact to achieve what I was looking to achieve.
So there was this 6-month gap between the initial conversation you had with Gloria, and then between that time and then coming forward publicly, and then the 6-month gap between coming forward and taking the story to a criminal trial. What was the conflict and the kind of dilemma you faced during these 6 months where you were deciding whether or not to go all the way and take it to a criminal trial?
Well, I mean, you know, the criminal case was the DA's case. So it wasn't really me taking it to trial. It was more me agreeing to show up for the trial and to give my testimony. And so I hadn't actually spoken to the DA at the time that I first spoke up publicly, but they were trying to reach me a few times, and I did eventually speak to them. And then, you know, we had conversations, etc. And after a lot of thought, I decided that it was just simply the right thing to do to show up for this trial. But it definitely is a very invasive and draining process. And I don't think I quite realized the extent of what that would be like.
So yeah, you have spoken quite a lot about the huge difficulties that come with pursuing this criminal trial, including the paranoia and the isolation and the huge disruption it causes to your life. What were your personal experiences of this, especially given kind of the widely known investigative tactics used by Harvey Weinstein in the past against people like Amber Gutierrez that you mentioned earlier?
Well, it affected, you know, so many aspects of my life. It was, I mean, terrifying for many reasons, including that, you know, obviously, I think probably for anyone, it's very, very terrifying to go into a case like this to face someone in a trial that has assaulted them. I think that's scary for anyone, but then it being of such a public nature is a whole nother layer of scary. And knowing how Harvey Weinstein had tried to silence people in the past and had them tracked and so forth, I kind of just assumed that my every move in life was being monitored or tracked in one way or another. Plus, on top of that, you know, the DA's office also kind of vet you, etc. And you know, they're doing it for all the right reasons, but it's invasive for sure. And so I felt like I had very little privacy those 2 years. And then not only do you worry about Harvey Weinstein and his teams, but also just, you know, people out there, because it's public. There's a lot of people out there with their own judgments and thoughts and ideas, you know, that can be quite scary.
I was just wondering, did you take any steps were you forced to take any steps to kind of protect yourself against this wider public judgment against your story?
Well, I mean, apart from, well, I did change my name in the process. I changed the spelling of my name in the process, although that was more because I realized after my initially coming out publicly, and this after I came out publicly, but before I got involved in the criminal trial. And I realized that if you Googled my name, because I'm not like a public person for any other reason, that's all that came up. And I just thought, oh no, like I work as a freelancer, and I need to kind of liaise with a lot of potential employers, and I thought, I can't have this, so I changed the spelling of my name, and that worked perfectly up until the day I testified. And now, because obviously then it was announced that I'd changed it, and so now it doesn't matter. So yeah, but just generally speaking, I honestly, I'm not sure that I did very many things apart from, I suppose just tried to be quite private. I wasn't I became quite private and in general in my life, and just kind of lived with it, lived in the paranoia. And every time something went wrong, I was like, did Harvey Weinstein do this? Am I being set up? And,
So turning to the trial itself, in which you, on behalf of the prosecution, were represented by Gloria Allred, and you faced Harvey Weinstein, who was represented by a woman called Donna Rutina, who essentially resorted to all these victim blaming and shaming tactics. Could you tell us a bit about the arguments that you made and how it is that you and Gloria responded to them?
Well, I mean, I feel that the defense in general just resorted to a lot of victim blaming and shaming as their entire strategy. I mean, but the way I see it is, Donna Rutina, who said some outrageous things in the press, for sure. I mean, really quite amazing. But, she was hired to do a job, and she had to argue something. And so that's what she went with. I mean, that basically, I suppose, I guess they just had nothing else to argue. So they just went with the old, very kind of outdated victim blaming and shaming arguments.
So Donna Rutina herself is actually a very strong and powerful woman, and in some ways, I guess, represents the progress of women's rights over the years and the breaking of the glass ceiling in the legal field and so on. Why do you think that women like her might choose to defend someone like Weinstein, and how do you think they might reconcile it with their feminism or the progress that they represent?
Well, I don't think she represents any feminism or progress. I think she is, as far as I know, she is a very successful Chicago lawyer who mostly was representing sexual predators. And that is her career. And I have no idea why she would choose to, like that, to be her field of kind of expertise. But I suppose it's, I mean, I have I don't know. I have no comment on it. Perhaps she's just getting paid a lot, and she's one of the few people that will agree to do the job.
And the arguments that her and people like her represent are sadly representative of a wider problem in society, which places onus on victims and survivors to be, as you've said before, the perfect victim. So could you tell us about what you make of this notion of the perfect victim and how we can go about breaking it apart?
Well, yes. I mean, it's amazing that we actually hold up, victims of sexual assault up to these ridiculous standards of kind of perfection and saintlyhood or something like that. And if you're not, then you're not somehow credible or valid. I think it's completely unrealistic. I think, I don't know, it's completely backwards. We don't scrutinize people, victims of other types of assaults, and we don't evaluate what their part in it was, the way for some reason people do when it comes to sexual assaults. If somebody gets robbed or something like that, nobody goes, oh, well, since you walked down that dark alleyway and, was flashing a Rolex, then I suppose you deserved it. And it doesn't count like as a robbery. So it's kind of a very, very kind of strange idea that somehow in sexual assaults, the victim is partly responsible for their sexual assault. There is no such thing. I mean, an assault is an assault, and it doesn't matter where you were, at somebody's house, in somebody's hotel, in a meeting room, in the street, wherever. It doesn't make it any less of an assault. And somebody being even sexually interested in you, um, I mean, the leap from that to somebody attacking you and not respecting a rejection is, quite a big one. And I don't think that it should be part of the conversation or the argument, really.
And as you said, the conversation around sexual violence and assault is always, or very often at least, centered around the survivor and what they should do or should have done in the past to protect themselves, or how they should respond to their assault, whether or not they should report it, and so on. And not enough onus or responsibility is placed on institutions such as workplaces or university campuses. What do you think universities around the world, where young people are victim to sexual harassment and violence almost on a daily basis, need to do in order to prevent this from happening, and how is it that they need to change?
Well, I mean, not just universities, but all places everywhere in life in general, places of work and schools, and just I think all over in the world and in society, I think we should share the responsibility to create an environment where victims of sexual assault can come forward safely without without the fear of being judged and not believed and even blamed for their assault. I think that we too often not only look at what was the part of like what was their responsibility in it when there is no such thing really. Also, always are focused on what should they do? What should they do differently? No, what should the rest of us do differently to make it an easier choice for somebody to come forward and to do the right thing? I think that is the message I would like to put out there.
So coming back slightly to your trial, at the end of this absolutely harrowing trial and hours of deliberation, the jury found Weinstein guilty of rape and criminal sex act. Do you think this decision by the jury represents a failure of the very arguments that Rutina or people who think in that way were making? And do you think it represents a gradual change in mindset in the ordinary person around issues of consent and sexual violence?
I mean, I hope so. I hope that it shows, where we are, that it reflects where we are as a society at this time, and that there's progress, and that we have moved away from some of those ideas. I feel that this jury was very good. They've spoken out in public since as well, really clarifying that they focused in on the actual incidents and the testimony and the evidence that was put forward to do with the charges that were made, and not really the choices or behaviors of the victims pre and post, etc. I think that's very, very important, and it was a very good and progressive and obviously very savvy jury.
So after the trial was over, you returned to New York for Weinstein's sentencing, which you attended, I believe, with Jessica Mann and Annabella Sciorra, the other two women who testified against Weinstein in the trial. Could you talk to us about this experience of sitting through the sentencing and what it felt like when it was all finally over?
It was such an amazing and powerful morning, I have to say. I met for the first time with Jessica Mann and Annabella Sciorra, and also Tara-Leigh Wolfe, Dawn Dunning, and Lauren Marie Young, who were the witnesses, the kind of supporting witnesses, prior bad acts witnesses. And we were all sitting in the front row when the testimony was read out, holding hands, and it was just such an incredible moment. And that entire morning was actually an incredible morning, because we've been living these parallel lives almost for the past couple of years, but never actually met. And it was just, it was incredible, and it made it all the more, so much more powerful, I think, to have them there.
To touch very quickly on these prior bad act witnesses, what role do you think they played in the trial? And do you think that set an important precedent for similar trials going forward?
I think so. I absolutely think so. The thing about, I mean, I'm not sure exactly why they didn't convict him on the predatory charges. But I feel that with Weinstein, it's just so clear that this is a pattern, and that this is something he has been doing for decades, and he would keep doing if he wasn't where he is now. There's no doubt in my mind that he would have just kept going and felt even more empowered to do so. And so I think that those witnesses were very important in this. And I'm so happy and glad that they were heard too.
A lot of the conversation, turning slightly away from the trial to kind of wider issues surrounding sexual violence, a lot of the conversation around sexual violence is centered around cisgender women, whereas actually anyone can be a survivor of sexual violence. So how do you think the voices of cisgender men, as well as both transgender men and women, fit into the story of sexual violence? And what role do you think gender specifically plays in this conversation?
Well, obviously sexual assaults happen across the board, regardless of gender. And I think obviously each circumstance has its own kind of hurdles and problematic kind of perceptions and ideas that are out there that probably need to be corrected and more informed, and we need to be more educated about. So yeah, it's a funny one with women, because a lot of times we make it into like a gender issue, and actually it's not completely a gender issue. But I think with women in particular, I do feel that for some reason they are seen as less credible, and I'm not sure, that is something I do feel, where sexism comes in. I don't know, like I feel like, when I heard about, for example, the Kevin Spacey thing or something like that, that was, one man, and I didn't really hear anyone not believing him. Whereas with Harvey Weinstein, it can be 100 women, and there's still a few people out there who are questioning, whether this guy is a complete rapist. And that's amazing to me. Amazing that, how many women does it take to, So it's I feel that probably if you're a man and you've been sexually assaulted, then you probably have, or transgender, then you have a whole nother set of difficulties to deal with and fears. I completely get that. Yeah. So it varies, I think, from situation to situation.
Just to pick up briefly on the Kevin Spacey issue, you said the fact that if a man ever comes forward with a story like this, they seem to be anyway believed immediately, whereas 80 to 100 women have come out against Weinstein, and there are still doubts and questions being thrown around. Is that to do you think, with this heteronormative nature of kind of sexuality and relationships around us, and that we kind of expect women to kind of fit themselves into these relationships with powerful men around them?
In what way? Sorry.
Just in the sense that kind of women, when they work with the powerful men around them and kind of find themselves in close relationships with them, are just kind of expected to accept sexual violence or sexual assault as part and parcel of the experience, whereas with men, that kind of, you don't expect kind of this homosexual relationship to happen in the same way. Does that make sense?
I suppose so. For sure, there's definitely some sort of, I think it comes back to the entire thing about women, somehow having to be kind of like pure, like non-sexual beings to be credible, like non-human to be credible, not too feminine, or I mean, I don't know, like I feel like definitely it's all part of like the kind of patriarchal mindset.
Mhm.
And yeah, so
Just a few final questions from me. Your journey over the past 2.5 years has all happened at the forefront and alongside, in parallel to, I guess, the Me Too movement, which kind of was launched in the mainstream through this October 2017 article in the New York Times and in the New Yorker. Do you think your story has kind of in some ways been conflated with the Me Too movement? And how do you think the two interact?
well, I think that the Me Too movement absolutely paved the way
Mhm.
for, you know, women like me to be able to come forward about this. I mean, if there wasn't this wave hadn't happened, then I wouldn't have felt safe
Mhm.
coming forward for sure. So it's definitely been like one of the driving forces of this entire kind of leap forward, I feel, and I hope, with uh, our awareness about these situations and the reality of the sexual assaults. Um, and so I'm very, very grateful for the Me Too movement, absolutely. And I feel like it's even though I'm not directly part of the movement and I haven't been very active in that sense, you know, I am very vocal and out there. Um, it's certainly something that's kind of like run parallel and enabled us to even be here at this point, you know.
Final question from me. Do you think that your story over the years has been reported in a fair and respectful way? And what steps do you think the mainstream media and also social media needs to take in order to give a story of sexual violence and assault the coverage it deserves, while also being conscious of the boundaries and lives of survivors?
Well, I think that there's definitely a lot of sensationalism still. And and obviously that's because a lot of media outlets are just concerned with stirring a little bit of controversy and kind of, you know, getting people to read it out of intrigue and try to be engaging. And sometimes, unfortunately, they will. They will report it quite, you know, dramatically. And sure, it is dramatic to some degree, but I also kind of like, sometimes I feel like some of the outrageous statements that are out there, it's amazing that they even get a platform at this point, but even so, it's kind of like they will still print it, because even for the shock value of somebody saying something insane, um, such as some of the statements that Donna Rutina made, for example, I think that's something that they're doing. And I feel like, again, more just hearing and becoming more informed and educated and listening to um, survivors and reporting that. And probably, yeah, I feel like sometimes, yeah, they perhaps focus on some of the wrong things, but that's because, you know, they want attention too. So I don't know. I think, yeah, just being more informative, more educated in general, and more progressive.
Turning now to an anonymous question that we've had from our members.
Yeah.
Um, did you ever expect going into this trial that men like Harvey Weinstein will ever be held accountable for their actions? And how do you feel now that the trial is concluded? Did it bring a sense of closure?
You know, it really felt like some sort of closure when the sentencing came out, because when the verdict came out, I still felt it wasn't completely over, but with the sentencing, that felt good. And I finally felt a kind of peace that I hadn't felt for a long time. And so I wasn't sure that was going to happen. You know, when I was waiting for the verdict, I was kind of bracing myself for it to go either way, really. I didn't think that they would just let him off, actually, but I did think that because we're in such a transitory period, that perhaps a hung jury was likely. But that would have actually also meant that he kind of was just, that he would have basically walked for now. So I certainly didn't know which way it was going to go. And so it was an incredible relief when it did go the way it went. And then with the sentencing, that was an even more amazing relief, because not only did the jury get it, but the judge got it as well. And I do really hope that it's a reflection of where we're at with regards to these issues.
Thank you, Miriam. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we close for today?
Believe survivors.
Thank you. I think that's a really, really powerful note to end on. It's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much once again for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. I really appreciate, I'm very honored to have been invited to speak with you. Thank you.